Thank you everyone for being with us today. Really excited to have this conversation. This webinar is titled Securing Education, How Adaptive Security Can Protect Students, Faculty, Staff, and Research. I'm joined here today by three of the foremost CISOs within the United States. I'm joined here by Lorna Koppel, who is the Director of Information Security and the CISO at Tufts University, by Marc Scarborough, who's the CISO of Rice University, and Steve Safranek, who's the CISO of West Chester University of Pennsylvania. Really excited to have this conversation today. I think educational institutions really face a unique set of challenges, which is a bit of a diverse set of faculty, staff, and students, right? That might not be representative of the archetypical or average workforce within large enterprise companies. And there's also somewhat open networks, right? As you have a large student base as well who are accessing systems, which can leave educational higher ed institutions exposed, right? Compared to some other types of industries. So I think today we're going to explore the unique challenges faced by the higher education industry. And then we can talk a bit about how user adaptive risk management can help solve some of these challenges. So my first question today is for Lorna. At Tufts University, there's a diverse population of students, staff, and faculty. How does this variety of personnel and people create unique security challenges in securing Tufts University?
Yes, there's so many different things that come in that are that complicate the whole picture. And it starts with the fact that we have so many different personas. You can easily be a staff member, and you might teach a class or two, and you also could be taking classes. So right there, you've got three different personas, and you may work across different schools. So there's who are you at any one time? The other challenges are there's so many systems that keep track of have some information about you and your role. And those are not necessarily well maintained because of the timeliness of faculty coming and going. So there's a lot of challenges of having, what is the status of individuals? And we're a prevalent BYOD environment. We have obviously a lot of students and all the IoT things that they bring onto the campuses with them. And even faculty and staff can have personal devices. So, what do you do in an environment with that and when they're using those devices? And some of the other challenges that we face is people come and go at very odd times. So somebody may teach a class and be an adjunct faculty and only be there for, one semester and then not come back for two more semesters. And so who's actually active at one time in our environment, who's actually, potentially having risky behavior that could cause us some challenges. And, some of the open networks, everybody wants to collaborate and you're always doing a lot of different things. So, a lot of the segmentation that you think would be easy is not on how you would do that or the financial resources to be able to do that. And then, the idea to me of being able to have adaptive ways of adjusting to the risks an individual poses and the real-time approach at looking at that is very exciting because we have so many other things that we can't really get the good, honest triggers. But if we can get a lot of real-time data to be able to control that, that is a game changer for what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think you made a good point, how critical the identity aspect is of all aspects of security, how challenging I think it is, specifically in higher ed, because of the varied roles that can be there, the multiple roles that users have generally, and specifically adjuncts. You mentioned that, and that's a constant challenge in how we address the life cycle of adjuncts at our campus, how we apply different retention models to them, because like you said, they could be there only maybe for half a semester in spring, and they're planning to come back, but they won't know until next spring exactly. So there's a lot of really specific challenges in identity, training those users along with that because of those roles that they have. That higher ed it's a constant challenge, and I think it's an open discussion that is ongoing among colleagues and peers.
I think just segmenting those networks can't be easy, right? And I think Lorna, you brought up a great point. Sometimes there's a professor who might also be a student, right? And kind of the blurred lines between different personas, right? At a bank, it's pretty clear this person has access to these things, right? At the university, it might not be so clear.
Most
Absolutely.
definitely at any one time. And then the authoritative systems that you might have access to kind of understand who that person is will not necessarily have clear information to really help you judge, what roles they should have. So it is, you have to really kind of right size your security approach and understand where your risks are, maybe in different ways that you wouldn't in a corporation because you have so many personas.
I think one thing to mention as well that we're talking about is there's a life cycle, and it can be a long life cycle where you may not see that in a corporate environment. In higher education, for example, we have students that become staff. So they finish their undergraduate degree. We've had records for them for a long time, and now they're staff. Now that time between being a student and a staff member could be years, right? But we still have those records of their student experience that we have to remember to marry to their staff experience so that they have that single account, or otherwise we have multiple identities for different people based on those roles that even if they don't overlap. The other thing that's the challenge for higher education in this space is that we often retain access for certain kinds of affiliations. So you have alumni, you have emeritus faculty, you have retirees that often in higher education maintain some level of access to resources with the institution, largely probably for development and alumni relations reasons, right? For fundraising for the future. But they also often have access to critical and sensitive resources for a period of time beyond their normal affiliation with an institution.
Yeah, to
And
that
to
point.
complicate,
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
and to complicate that situation is, I know we're a tier 1 research institution, and we collaborate with a lot of outside individuals on research, and they need to be able to collaborate. They need to be able to do work together. And how do you support that? How do you support those individuals without giving excessive access or giving what they need? Is very, how do you support the researchers to be effective and still not introduce a significant amount of risk?
And that leads me into my next question, which I'll start with Mark here. So universities like Rice store vast amounts of sensitive data. And to Laura's point, perhaps there are researchers who are collaborating with people who are not within the university. Maybe they're not even in the country, right? They could be across borders. And so how do you balance security for your sensitive data, your research data, versus reducing friction, right? Because it can be there's often that balance between security and friction in operations.
Yeah, and as mentioned, one thing that people may not realize is often universities are like small cities. We have students that they live here, they eat here, they sleep here, they do everything here. We have clinics and hospitals. We have restaurants, and at Rice we have bars. We have theaters, we host concerts, we have major sporting events, right? So we're a full-fledged small city, and each of those data points has different regulatory requirements. And so we're required to protect student data, health data, banking data, and credit card data according to those regulations. The challenge that we're moving into is the research data, and it's one we've had for some time, but it's getting more complicated. Each research project potentially has its own contract and its own data requirements. And that makes compliance somewhat challenging. Obviously, we're trying to always protect the data and to make sure only the right people have access. But each of those contracts might have something slightly different, a slightly different requirement for how this particular researcher needs to protect this set of genomic data. And that changes fairly frequently these days. And as this has been pointed out, we know that work actually gets done through that collaboration, especially in research. And as the points that you've made and Lorna have made is that collaboration usually extends way beyond our borders, right? Our university borders. And so, and then we know we have to be able to support that again to minimize that friction. And to be honest, right, our researchers and most of our staff aren't actually worried about information security, right? They're not worried about nation state attacks. They're not worried about ransomware. They're here to get their work done. They're here to get their research done. And so it's nice to have an awareness platform, right, that can really address people where they're working and what their risks actually are based on what they're working on. And so I think that is one area we can really strive to reduce that friction by providing training that is relevant and that addresses specific risks for their area.
And I'd like to add on to that. There's another aspect that researchers are even less familiar and comfortable with is the rapidly changing privacy laws globally. And we do a lot of global research. And how do we help them with how they design their protocols, also how they handle the data, and understanding that there's a lot of different laws that overlap depending on their jurisdictions. And then with the rapidly changing federal regulations taking the requirements to a lower and lower classification level is making it, universities move slow. So how do we adjust rapidly to help support them when the regulations change much faster than we necessarily have the capacity to respond?
Yeah, to your point on the speed of that, I usually find that, like you said, security is not at the forefront of the researchers' minds. They want to be empowered to do their research, collaborate with who they need to, and doing the evaluation to make sure that they're compliance or that we're meeting the needs of the data use agreements that they're contracted to follow. I usually find that we're brought in at the very last minute because their focus is enabling what's going on, getting the right materials, the contracts in place, and then we're left with very little time, if any, to do the review and make sure whatever environment's been established and what processes are in place are going to be compliant with the contracts that they signed. So we have to be flexible as security practitioners and effective in what we're teaching and sharing at those moments. But a lot of times, like you said, we're kind of seen as impeding the process rather than helping to protect anything, really.
I was going to make one point there. I think that's an important point as well. As I kind of joke at Rice, the research cybersecurity team is we're team last mile, right? We're the last hurdle or checkpoint that a researcher needs to pass. But one of our goals has been to educate on those evolving requirements. In some of the challenges we have there, right, or one project has a set of resources that was perfectly fine for that. But the regulations have changed since they started, and now they can't use it for a new portion of that research, right? And our role has really been to help educate and provide that awareness, right? There's new requirements for NIH for how long we have to store data. So we need to grow the storage platform, but really working with them to understand the new requirements, but also how can we help them achieve that compliance? Because the last thing they want to hear is, you've got to stop what you're doing so that we can focus on getting the technology right. So it is a bit of a challenge to educate, maintain compliance, and move them along the path as we're doing it.
And we have a lot of static training materials, and we can't adjust. It's because we don't have staff to maintain the training and change it. It gets behind, or we don't have a way to quickly get training available as things come out. So it's another challenge of how can we move fast to support the needs of what their training is.
And let's change gears here. And perfect segue. Traditional training models can often fall short. And at Dune Security, we work with a lot of large enterprise teams that have pretty robust security awareness functions, right? And maybe processes, and maybe the universities are a little under-resourced, right, in some of these areas. But Steve, my question for you is around the technology, right? The technology that's on the market, and how does it potentially fall short? Lorna brought up, I think, the perfect segue into it by saying that it can be a bit stale and it's not university specific, but would love to hear from you on what you've seen.
Yeah, I think there's a number of reasons really why that contribute to legacy security awareness training really not meeting the needs of what a current higher education customer needs. But it probably boils down to two primary factors. And one we hit And that's a typical lack of resources. I think a lot of higher education orgs and their teams don't have the resources to have a dedicated team of information security analysts or staff members that are just dedicated to going through the material that's available, whatever their current vendor is, finding what's appropriate, and being able to kind of monitor where that needs to go to what user. And so for a long time, I think most organizations were really just looking to probably check a box and, you know, achieve some plausible deniability for an insurance evaluation or any sort of local compliance. And it seems, I think too many vendors were just happy enough to create a product that fit just that, offering some generic models and modules that hit the high points of, you know, phishing or what, you know, over the last 5 years, what common threats and themes were. So if universities wanted to go beyond that and offer user education that was more customizable or applicable, you know, for our varied roles, the different access levels that users have, that had very different access to data sensitivity, regardless of role, and to the level of expertise that different users have, I think it becomes very difficult to offer that one size fits all content that's available with too many vendors right now, that will be applicable and useful to some users, and far too many find it redundant or not applicable to their job. And so really finding something that is adaptive without having the, you know, a large dedicated staff that commit to finding that content and for the right users, and then track the progress and failures, and so that they're getting engaging or relevant material if it's even available, makes it very difficult with what's out there today. Like I said, if, you know, some industries have such a large team that they're able to really spend the time to pick through something and find relevance and value. But in higher education, at least in my experience, I've never worked in a shop that had a dedicated team that was just for that, or even a person. So that gets really spread out between the analysts, my, you know, leadership, other people within IT to help make those campaigns, and that takes away from other important roles and tasks that they have. So I think really finding something that ties into your IDM system and can lift a load and really be helpful is something that's really critical in higher education, but is lacking largely outside of maybe a few options that are there.
And just to follow up on that, Steve, or for anyone else, not just on the training side, but on the phishing simulation side,
Absolutely.
right? A lot of security awareness training platforms have also phishing simulation capability. What have you seen there? What are the challenges you experience for the testing piece?
For what I've seen, is my biggest complaint, I think, with using things is a lack of customization. You have a catalog of templates that's available. A lot of it is outdated, and like some of the current ones we're using still has a large catalog of like COVID restricted ones, which, I mean, I know it's still out there, but they have timely pieces of content that get stuck in the main catalog and aren't, you know, updated and routinely changed out. So I think that's where you can find the most value for users, is in phishing sims. But when you do it, the value has to be clear to the user, because especially in higher ed, I think there's a large population that feels like you're being targeted or tricked. So if you don't get many chances to prove that this is for their own benefit and a value to them, not just the organization. So I think that's definitely the lack of customization and the lack of quality content and the templates you have available, I think, are my biggest complaint for what I've seen out there.
And I'd say another challenge that affects the effectiveness of phish testing and training is getting people to, you know, people don't necessarily open the emails in the first place. There's a lot of emails that come around, especially in higher ed, because you're on so many different lists and getting so much cross-institutional information. And a lot of people don't even open the emails. And then we also have the other flip side is, so you're only training certain people. And then the other part is, you know, if you want to have that real-time coaching moment, you know, when they do open it and they do click on something, some just can't absorb it because they're freaking out at that point. So, you know, how do you get them to get the training and absorb it and remember it? And phish testing, while good, plateaus, doesn't necessarily give you a good indicator of who really has the risky behavior.
Good point.
Yeah, it might be a good segue into quantification, right? And I think what we've done at Dune is kind of, I think, turn this all on its head and say security awareness training is dead as a industry, a sub industry. It needs to be much bigger. And I think the core of our platform is the quantification, right? It's hard to solve a problem if you don't know where it lies in real time with robust data. And I think large institutions like Westchester, like Rice, like Tufts have a lot of data. The problem is how do you correlate all those streams? So Lorna, if there was a world in which you could actually understand in real time, okay, this person is in this role and they need access to these types of things, and here's the risk profile. How would that change your day to day and improve security for Tufts?
It's I think very helpful, because then the other thing I really would want with that is to couple it with real-time data on what they're actually doing. So bringing in the sources from other things, not based it solely on their title, not solely on their last handful of fish tests, but also, what's the environment they're working in? Is it BYOD? What are the things that they're clicking on outside? How, what have they done to manage their security hygiene? And so all those things together help us put together a better profile of how to work with somebody. And so being able to have that kind of come together and alert us and help us adapt to what they need to help them be secure, or to be better at it, is really would change a lot of the time, and hopefully cut down on the amount of hand-holding that we have to do during incidents, small incidents, and coaching, and knowing that because of the emotions, they're not really retaining it at that point.
Absolutely.
I was going to say one thing along with that. And Steve mentioned the one size fits all, right? That our campuses don't like that. I don't think people in general care for the one size fits all security awareness training, the traditional approach of checkbox security. It's easier to explain to someone why they're getting targeted security awareness training if you can say it's because you're in the finance operations area, or because we have evidence that your account has been actively attacked. Although we've been able to defend it, you are a current target based on signaling from other tools, or your role, what we've seen. That sort of approach is much easier to help them understand why they're getting that training and not the training that they would find less relevant for their role. So I think that's an important aspect on selling the value of that training to our institutions.
Yeah, that's a great point. And without that intelligence, I think you almost have to fall back on that generic one size fits all, because when you don't have that information, you just have to cast the widest net and say, well, this might not be great for most of the population. There's a subset that's largest that will find a little bit of value in. And that's not not a great way to approach this, but sometimes with what you have available, maybe that's all you can do, unfortunately, and that's not a great way to mature your program.
We found it could be, and there was a good article in the Wall Street Journal front page last week, I believe, about how fish testing and training can actually be counterproductive if it's broad, right? And so I think about a researcher who's studying molecular biology at Tufts, and that person receiving a training that should be for a clerical employee in accounting, right? It just doesn't really make any sense. I love what you said, Mark. If within your seg, if you can see this is a very attacked user, right, and you can run access and permissions analysis to understand, okay, this is what the person has access to, and you can use AI to actually understand what risk that type of role places in that. Yeah, that's quite interesting. Any other ideas? I think this is an important point. If you did have accurate user risk profiles, what else? What are the possibilities? How could you, start to increase security? And this is just for the broad group here.
Oh, I think if you had that gives you the flexibility to have a maturing educational program for your users that is personalized, and it's an impossibility to do that without that, because like I said, you're either sticking to the basics, and right now I think we can all agree that like some of the easiest threats are still effective. So addressing those without intelligence makes the most sense. But then you're not maturing past that initial point. But if you try to go as a group and get up into advanced data security protections or very specific threats that aren't applicable to other groups or data regulations that have no bearing for other users, then you're getting above people's heads and where they don't care, and people are checking out. So having an individualized intelligence and ability to mature a program on a user level is really the only way I think that would be effective in bringing a whole group up without losing a large majority of your users along the way.
I like the idea of knowing in near real time what, being able to respond and getting alerts and being able to say, putting all these data points together and being able to say that, there are things that we need to adapt and adjust quickly. So how can we, what would those be? And some things, the traditional that a lot of people, have been trying to do is adaptive authentication. You see a higher risk, you have to escalate, how much authentication, levels you have to prove. And, another part would be being able, what can you automate from a response perspective? Is there anything that we could do to kind of microsegment or quickly, I think the most important is quickly raise the alarm so that we know something very strange is happening, and it may not be a big risk to the university, but it could be a really big risk to that individual. So, raising that up so that we can respond.
And that's actually, again, perfect segue. I feel like we must have had a lot of practice in here, but question here for Mark. So IT or security performance and workload. Again, within this new world in which you could potentially have accurate real-time employee risk quantification, how could adaptive security integrations improve performance and workload?
I think it starts with what Steve and Lorna have already touched on, right? Is the one size fits all approach doesn't really work for maturing a program. I love that phrase. I think that's right. You can have the compliance checkbox, but you haven't really moved the needle in many cases, right? Up to a certain degree. And then as Lorna pointed out, the ability to quickly change your program based on what you actually see. So she mentioned the authentication, the adaptive authentication. It's a good analogy. I mean, just to be clear there, that's a really good analogy, because we know that in modern technology, we like signaling from multiple solutions, and so that we can make decisions in real time about someone's access, right? Are they using a university laptop on the university network? Are they using their multi-factor correctly? Streamline service all the way through. But if something changes, we can change one of those signal sources without having to change the entire process. So we can adapt the authentication process based on something we see. So similar to this, if we know who has access to what information, what threats we're seeing on them, against them, and we know that we've given them some level of training already, we can take a step back and say, yeah, we're seeing these attacks. We can send them a note. We've seen these things. The training you've been taking should help you. Please let us know if you have any questions. So it allows us to put some of that trust back into an educated user community for them to make some decisions on their own, know that we're engaged on that level of training. So I think from that perspective, it really does reduce the workload, but also the worry to some degree of our teams when we see some of these threats come through, knowing that, well, at least our community's been trained for this, and they know that in their role, we've told them to expect to see these sorts of attacks.
And unless anyone else has anything else there, we can move to a question for Steve. Steve, I feel like you're passionate about this because we've discussed this quite a bit, but proactive cybersecurity culture, right? How have you seen an effective? How have you built an effective cybersecurity culture, and what are best practices there?
I think it can be really challenging for any organization, but I think higher ed has some unique challenges in terms of having like teeth to really enforce not only the cybersecurity training aspect, but cybersecurity in general. I think industries like healthcare and financial institutions, they have a lot of easy ways to draw lines in the sand and say, you're going to do this, you have to take this training, or there's immediate impact on your position or your ability to even work there. And that really does not exist in higher ed in my experience. So you really have to earn the buy-in from your users. And I think what we've been discussing earlier would be the most effective way to do that. Having that adaptive intelligence and being able to show a user not just a generic like what if this are you available type email came through, but really having the intelligence to show, okay, on this date this message came in, you did this. Now we're going to train you on that so that's avoided in the future. Removing the kind of boogeyman aspect of it and being able to show these are the actual attacks that you're experiencing every day, that the university is up against every day on these times, and then tailoring the training that they receive or the phishing simulations, whatever that looks like, to mirror that so that they are able to show quantifiable improvements and protect themselves, their own data. And I think also what really has been most effective on getting individual buy-in is really showing a user how this helps protect them in their personal life, tying these practices to this is going to protect your own identity, your family's resources. You can help teach your children how to protect themselves. I think if we can, the more real world examples and the again quantifiable information that we can show that they've experienced this and how they can take that into their own lives, is the best way to get buy-in in higher ed, because if you come down with the hammer approach, it's going to bounce back and hit you, and you're going to lose any leverage you have. So it has to be a collaborative effort. You have to get assistance from leadership, and to do that, I think you have to show value, and that's the best way to get that buy-in and grow the culture at a campus.
One of the
And I think
challenges,
oh, go ahead, Lorna. Sorry.
I would say, to make it real and show the impact to them, one of the challenges that's a little bit seems to be a little more unique to higher ed is these attacks been going on for years, and they kind of flow through the higher ed area, which is redirecting payroll deposits.
Yep.
And we just tend to be a little bit more vulnerable to that. And getting people to understand and see that people what they've had to go through when their paycheck does get diverted, or understand, make it real to them and say, what would you do if you had you didn't get your next 1 or 2 paychecks? And then it starts to say, like, yes, this is why that two-factor authentication is really important to protect me. It's my responsibility to also protect me. So that is a key thing that seems to resonate really well with people, is how the security at work will affect their personal life.
Awesome. What about let's kind of a fun one here. This is for the broader panel. And thank you so much. I mean, this has been fantastic. So what about AI and deepfakes, right? I think it's a moving target, right? And you can have the president of the university delivering a video message to all the employees, right? Saying, it could be as simple as the gift card scan, right? Can you go buy some gift cards, send me the codes? I feel like that would be pretty effective if someone did that, right? How do you educate and students? Yeah, students are a little, on average, younger and maybe a little more tech forward, so it could help from that perspective. But yeah, how do you deal with a moving target and evolving threats?
Well, I think it goes with the other conversations we've had, is to tell the campus what's currently happening and what's currently possible, and some things to be aware of, and to educate them on the normal ways our leadership would communicate to the campus. The other aspect of that is something we probably all need to do from that example, is to talk to our senior leadership, including our presidents, about this threat, and so that they have an awareness that it's happening, and then they can work with their teams to make sure that the way they communicate to our organizations is in a way that is recognizable and maybe harder to mimic from something like a deep fake technology. We know that's going to get better, but letting the campus know this is coming, and let leadership know that this is coming or happening, and helping work through some strategies on better ways to communicate more consistently. And again, leveraging the training platforms to somehow include these examples, so that people are familiar with them.
Yeah, one thing I come back to is these emerging threats like this is it's hard to integrate in when you don't have a program at a level that you're already feel comfortable with the basics. Communication with your users is it's almost like a dwindling resource that you've got to spread out, because if I would like to, this threat just came out, or this, this current phishing campaign's going on. If you pepper your users with information too frequently, then it's gone. It becomes white noise. It's not looked at. So you've got to be careful with the communications you put out there and the topics you choose to do. So something like that, while I agree it's a huge threat, we've got to balance that with, okay, if we put this out as opposed to another generic, more common threat, are we going to start losing user interaction and understanding and care? So it's difficult without that baseline of a quality program and user understanding that you can have those conversations. I think, Mark, what you said is the key. Filter that through leadership and allow that to come down through the individual departments, maybe, rather than like a mass communication or posting on a site. But it's yeah, you've got to really weigh what topics you put out to the broader community, so you don't start losing when you do make the communication, that they're keen to look at it and make sure that they do read it, because like Lorna said, maybe you get half the users to look at your emails, and that's probably the employee side.
And one of the key things that we've been trying to do is keep the message pretty simple for certain individuals, which is, one of the things is stick to the approved processes. Because you get an email doesn't mean you should go around the process. And, don't ever do that. And if you don't do that, then you're not going to have some of the problems that leads to. And also, getting people to stop and just pause for a minute when they're reading something or looking at something. Think about what you're seeing. Is it triggering your emotions? And are you making decisions not based on what's actually on the screen, like it's coming from an email address that would never be here? So AI makes it so much easier to obfuscate some of the triggers that people would normally base their analysis on. So how do we, one of the things we don't train either for the latest emerging threat, but try to teach some basic principles that will go across all threats.
Yeah.
But the speed at which it happens with AI is certainly a challenge.
Well, one thing I would add too is there is an opportunity for us as well to lean into using the same technologies. And so we have some things that we consider internally at our institution about helping people triage those decisions, to the point I always say, to Lorna's point, if I can insert a dramatic pause before action occurs, right, that I've made progress, I've moved the needle. But as well, we can use those same AI tools to help us evaluate. Getting past the traditional email kinds of things like DKIM and that sort of thing, and SPF records, but moving into having our email systems understand some of the nuance that an AI tool might have added. It can then help us understand and dissect that message. Does that seem normal? Does it seem relevant? Does it seem, is it just an anomalous message that came through? And to alert the end user that this does not seem like a normal thing that your president would send to you. Use caution, insert pause.
I think we covered quite a lot today. I think the main takeaways that I have is that securing the higher education industry is incredibly difficult, right? I think there's so many different types of roles, and how do you manage risk for roles that are dissimilar from many other industries, right? Like professors or researchers. You have an industry where people might not open half of their emails, right? I think that's a really critical point that I didn't really think about until this session today. And you also have a heavily regulated industry that requires a lot of compliance. And so I think the combination of these things means that like our premise here at Dune is security awareness training as it exists today is dead. And I think that's beyond true for the higher education industry, based on this conversation. And so, yeah, no, I think it's really important what we're working on in building adaptive security to ensure role-specific protection, and to pull in all of the different signals about employee risk and correlate them to build highly accurate employee risk quantification. So thank you so much, Mark, Lorna, Steve. Thank you for joining today. I really appreciate your time, and we're really happy to be a part of this solution.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for having us.